Hello and welcome to the next module in the LifePlan Volunteer Training Program. So glad you've made it this far. I know we've had a lot of information that we've thrown at you, but I just want to encourage you just to take the information that you've been given and just let God use you in the way that you love your clients. And don't be too worried about getting everything right. He's going to help you. He's going to empower you as you go through this process. Today's topic is the topic of sexual brokenness. And as we start talking about this topic today, I want to share a story that happened early in my life as a minister's wife. Now, let me just put this out there first, okay? So there's no special training that you get to be a pastor's wife. You know, pastors will often go to school or seminary and they'll be trained and they'll know what to do. But pastors' wives, we're just kind of thrown into it. There's like no class you can take on, at least not that I found. And even if there was a class, I wouldn't have taken it. Because when I married my husband, he was a French major. So I thought I'd be living in France. But as it was, I turned out in ministry and church ministry, which we've been in for several years. So early on, in fact, in our first ministry as a couple, my husband was serving as a youth pastor in a small church in southern Indiana. And it was Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. And they asked me if I would speak about sanctity of human life. Now, I was a natural person to ask to speak about it because, first of all, I'm the youth pastor's wife. Secondly, we had one child at that time who was adopted. And so that kind of puts you into that person can speak because they have a child that's adopted. So I went to speak on it, and I remember thinking about, I can speak passionately about a lot of topics, but that day I knew that I needed to speak with truth and grace, and especially with grace. And as I spoke that day, that Sunday, it was really interesting because that Sunday there happened to be a person in the congregation who she had had an abortion and she was suffering severely from post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the abortion. So much so that she couldn't even leave her home. She had somehow managed that day to leave her home to go to the church that was closest to her house. And as she was sitting in church that day, I got up and spoke about the impact of abortion on women and sanctity of human life. Now, I don't know, God did some amazing things that day by bringing her there. And after the service, she approached, I can't remember if it was my husband or if it was a senior pastor that she approached. And she asked if I could possibly come and visit her. So again, this was all new to me. But I went and visited. I took my 1-year-old son with me, and that began a relationship that continued throughout our time at that church, where I would go and spend one afternoon a week with her in her house as she had her toddler child and I had my toddler child. They would play together, and I would just sit there and be with her and be a comforting presence to her and listen to her as she was dealing with the results of the abortion that she had had. She was a person who was sexually broken, and as a result of that, was having a very difficult time dealing with life, dealing with issues in her life. There are people all around us who are sexually broken, whether it's from abortion, whether it's from past abuse, whether it's from pornography. All of these things just come on to people and create something that makes it very difficult for them. And we are in the position, as we've mentioned before, of being rescuers. We can go out there. We need to do something. We can't be silent about it. We need to speak out in our area of influence, and we need to love on the people that God puts in our lives that are sexually broken and help them as they deal with these issues. I think of an old hymn. I grew up in a church that sang hymns. Maybe some of you guys know this. This is the song. It's called Rescue the Perishing, and the words to it go, rescue the perishing, care for the dying, snatch them in pity from sin and the grave. Weep o'er the erring one, lift up the fallen, tell them of Jesus, the mighty to save. Rescue the perishing, care for the dying. Jesus is merciful. Jesus will save. As I said, there are people around us who are broken, and it's our job to go out there and to try to rescue them. But we have to always remember that it's Jesus who saves. He is the one that will save. He can use us. It might take a while, but it's all through him and through his power. And that's what we're doing at LifePlan. That's what we're trying to do, is just to give a way to speak into people's lives and to bring them to Jesus so that he can rescue them and save them from the things that they are perishing from. So I want to go over just a little bit now, and I'm just going to touch on just a little bit on the issue of pornography. There's a whole bunch of other modules that we have that you can find on our YouTube channel that talk more specifically about pornography, but I'm going to bring it up now just because it is something that is rampant. I mean, it's so rampant that it's normal. Even our teens, our kids, a lot of them think that it's normal and fine to be viewing pornography. There's nothing wrong with it. It's harmless. I think of a story that, I was preparing to speak about pornography at a youth conference that happened a while ago, and one of my kids, my 16-year-old, knew that I was speaking about it, and he also works at a local fast food restaurant, and we were talking, and he told me about an instance when he walked into the restaurant and one of his coworkers had his phone out and was looking at his phone, and another coworker went over to him and said, "Are you looking at pornography?" And he didn't even miss a beat. He just said, "Doesn't everybody?" It's just so normalized that, it's really sad to think that something like that is so normalized. So to start off with, I'm going to give a definition of pornography because I think it's really important that we understand what it really is, because sometimes there's some things that we can say, well, that's not really pornography, but it might actually meet the definition. So here's the definition of pornography. It's anything that is designed for sexual arousal outside of God's plan, outside of a marriage relationship. It could be videos, could be pictures, could be books. There's a whole thing right now on emotional pornography, which is the whole idea that some of these romance novels that women read, that the same thing happens in a woman's brain when they're reading the romance novel that happens in a man's brain when he's viewing videos or pictures of pornography. And it sets up some of the same elements of putting this fantasy world out there and putting your expectations up to something that isn't realistic. And it can interfere the same way with relationships and all of that. So yes, romance novels can be pornography. It's anything. Again, if it provides that sexual arousal that's outside of what God's plan was, then it's considered pornography. So that really opens the definition up for a lot of different things. Pornography is very harmful on a person. There's a lot of different harmful effects of pornography. I'm just going to talk about a few. One is systemic abuse. It changes people's ideas about sex. It makes people think that sex is one thing. This especially impacts the younger generation and can also lead to date rape, because they can go in thinking, well, this is what sex is, this is what's normal, this is what should be expected, and then they expect those things from their partner or the person they're dating, and it can lead to violence in a relationship as well. So it really sets up that thing for systemic abuse. So it's very dangerous in that way. It hurts relationships, and we're going to listen in a little bit at the end of this to a story from Peyton, who talks about the way that pornography impacted her relationship and hurt her in her relationship. It changes the brain. Our brains are being formed up until about the age of 26. It's still rather moldable. And so the younger you are when you start watching pornography, it actually starts creating these patterns in the brain and pathways in the brain that literally changes the way that the brain is working. This is why somebody can start off by just looking at soft pornography, but then after a while of watching that doesn't satisfy anymore, and it takes harder and harder and harder stuff to get that same level of satisfaction that they had at the beginning when they were first watching the softer stuff. And so it literally changes the pathways in your brain, changes your brain. And when I think of that, I just think, aren't you glad that God is in the process, God is in the business of transforming our brains, that He can transform us through the renewing of our minds, Romans 12:2. So we know that God can reverse those changes. We don't need to be hopeless in it, but we do also have to realize that those changes in the brain are very difficult, and it can lead to quite a difficult time breaking the habit. And we need to keep that in mind as we're working with people who struggle with pornography. Another thing that it does is there's a connection to human trafficking, and we're going to talk about human trafficking in another module. There's a huge connection between pornography and human trafficking. You can almost say that pornography drives a lot of the human trafficking business, because a lot of those, they need people to do those videos. And so a lot of those videos are actually of people who have been trafficked. In fact, there is no way to know if the video that you're viewing, the pornography you're viewing, is from somebody who's there willingly or somebody who's actually been trafficked and is an abuse victim. You could be watching a rape in process when you're watching pornography. And there's so many things that you can do with editing of videos today that can make it look like it's consensual, but it's not. So there is a tie-in, and then there's also, we call this kind of like a triad in a way, between abortion, pornography, and human trafficking. Because think of what happens. Pornography, there's a business out there. More and more people are going and wanting. If I were to give you, I'm not going to give you the stats, but if I were to give you the stats, it would blow your mind of all the people who are watching pornography just every minute of the day. It's crazy. So there's those people, the demand for pornography is out there. So the people who are producing pornography will go to human traffickers, or human traffickers will produce pornography. So it drives that. And then in the process, sometimes the victims get pregnant, and so they'll take the victims to a place like Planned Parenthood, who will side on the side of the human trafficker more often than not, and will provide an abortion for that woman so she can go back to the human trafficking and go back to the producing of pornography. So you can see it really is, it's a horrible triad of the three. They're definitely related, which is why LifePlan speaks into this issue, because it is something that's definitely connected in with the whole pro-life issue. If you're truly pro-life, you've got to be against pornography. You've got to understand the danger of it to really be pro-life. Pro-life, people who are pro-life understand that there is only death in pornography and need to speak out against that. So I know I've given you a lot of information about pornography and sexual brokenness, and as you go forward as a LifePlan consultant and dealing with people in LifePlan, you're going to have the opportunity to talk to people about pornography. In fact, one of the questions on our intake form is, how often do you view pornography? And that can give you an opportunity to speak into it and to share some of the dangers of pornography, or to see, what it is that's bringing them to that. What need are they trying to fulfill through that? But I also want you to recognize that the danger of pornography and what happens in pornography is so deep, and sexual brokenness is so deep, that we can't expect to heal it or solve it in just one session. In fact, we can't be expected to heal it or solve it at all. It's something that takes strength beyond us. And sometimes it's going to take expertise beyond us. So if you get into a situation with a client who is really dealing with and struggling with issues in sexual brokenness or issues in this way, recognize your limitations and recognize when the most helpful thing you can do would be to refer that person to a professional counselor or to somebody else who can really walk them through that process. Don't expect to see changes happen overnight. While yes, God can change and transform somebody instantaneously, more often than not, it takes a long time, a long process, a hard process. And that's when we, as consultants at LifePlan, can walk alongside somebody and help them through it and be there with them as they go through it, as long as they might need. So keep that in mind as you go forward serving at LifePlan. We're going to end right now this module with a story from Peyton. Peyton is one of our volunteer receptionists at LifePlan, and she is a wonderful young lady, but she grew up in the church, and she was dating somebody who also grew up in the church, not just in the church, but in a pastor's family. And this is Peyton's story of how she realized the pervasiveness and the damage that pornography can do to a person, even inside the church. So watch her story and then be encouraged that that God is the one who can save. Jesus can save. We can rescue the perishing, care for the dying. Jesus is merciful. Jesus will save.
Hello, my name is Peyton Leahy. I am a receptionist here at LifePlan. I have been here for, I think it's been a couple years, and I have loved getting to know everybody here and just learning more about LifePlan and what this ministry does. It has been just an amazing ministry to learn about, and just their heart for women and families. So as I learned more about what LifePlan was about, and just their heart for people choosing God's way for their lives when it comes to their sexual integrity, I started sharing my story and just a little bit about my past. And so they asked me to share that and just bring more awareness to something that is a huge issue in our country and across the world right now. So when I was a senior in high school a few years ago, I went on a senior trip to New York City with my class, and my parents, they were the chaperones for that trip, so they took us, and there were just 12 in my class. I went to a very small Christian school, and one of the guys in my class knew this family that lived in New York City. It was a pastor and his wife and their children, and they all lived in their church that they pastored in New York City. So they invited us to come and stay there as long as we helped a couple days a week with their food pantry. So we stayed with this family, and one of the sons of the pastor was our tour guide all week. And I still remember, like, the first time I saw him, it was kind of like I had a crush right away. He was super cute. He was very confident. I didn't know this right when I saw him, but he played the guitar and sang, as I would later find out, and he was just very outgoing, and pretty much all the girls that week had a crush on him pretty quick. So I got to know him a little bit throughout the week. My parents really got to know him since they were the chaperones, and he would take us around everywhere in New York City. So they got to know him pretty well. And at the end of the week, I really had a crush on him, but I didn't think I would ever see him again. He was in New York City. I lived in Indiana at the time, so I just never thought our paths would cross again. So a few months later, he decided to fly out and surprise me. We hadn't been talking at all, but my parents had told him, if you ever want to come out and visit, you're welcome. So he surprised me and came to Indiana and just spent the weekend with me and my family. And that's when we hit it off even more and got to talk more, and we got closer, and told each other we would be interested in pursuing a relationship in the future and continuing to talk. So he went back to New York City, and then I went to South Carolina for college a few months later, and we continued to talk. We would talk on the phone all the time, we would text, and we were just getting really close really fast. So a few months after that, after we'd been talking for a while, we were up late texting one night, and he sent me a text that said that he was struggling with porn. And that was probably one of the worst nights of my life, because I was so naive, I guess, up until that point. I had no idea that it was something that really guys struggled with, but I definitely didn't know that it was something Christian men struggled with. And women also, it's a huge struggle for them too, and is becoming more of an issue. But anyway, at the time I didn't know any of that, and so I was just in complete shock, and I was like, what is wrong with him? What's wrong with me? I thought that it was maybe I was doing something wrong in the relationship that made him, turn to that. So it was just a lot of emotions all at one time. I had no idea what to do. So I talked to my parents and my friends, and, just trying to get some help and try to work through what I had just found out about him. And I came to realize that all of my friends' boyfriends were either struggling with it at the time or had struggled with it in the past. And that was really hard to hear, because it was just, my eyes were being opened to the reality that it's something so many people struggle with. But it was also comforting to know that they understood what I was going through and they could relate to me. So looking back, I'm so thankful to have their support through everything, and having people close to me that understood me and understood what was going on. And I also talked to my parents, and, we tried to set some boundaries and just things going forward, some guidelines that would help us and that would help him overcome this struggle. And he let us know that it was something he had struggled with for a few months, and so my parents encouraged him to get an accountability partner, to get a filter on his computer and his phone, and to read some books and, just really try to overcome this struggle. And he just didn't seem like he was taking it that seriously. He didn't want to get a filter. He felt like he could just find his way around the filter. And he got an accountability partner, but it was just a friend that he would talk to every once in a while. But I still decided to go forward with the relationship and become official. And the whole next year was kind of just back and forth of him doing okay and, getting victory, and then kind of going back and feeling tempted again and unsure of how he should overcome the struggle, which then affected me emotionally, because he said a couple times that if I didn't talk to him enough or encourage him enough, that it made it harder for him to resist looking at pornography, which then just made me feel like in some way it was my fault, and in some way I was affecting his battle with pornography in a negative way. And that, it just made me feel really insecure, like that I was causing this issue and that I had something to do with it, that it was my fault in some way. So we both were dealing with a lot of things emotionally, mentally, spiritually because of this. So after we had been dating about a year, I just saw this cycle that he was in of feeling shame because he looked at pornography and getting depressed because he just felt so terrible that he gave in, that he would then watch pornography to feel better, and then he would feel shame again and feel depressed and feel terrible, and then to feel better he would watch pornography. So it was just this cycle that he was in, which then I would find out about it and then I would feel terrible and like that there was just no hope because there was nothing I could do, but then I also felt like there was something I should be able to do that would help him. So we both just dealt with a lot emotionally, and we were long distance, which I think made it even harder because I had no idea what he was doing, hundreds of miles away. So I remember getting off the phone with him one night and thinking he was going to take his own life because he just sounded so defeated and he didn't want to do it anymore. So it reminded me of James 1:14 and 15, where it talks about how our desire gives birth to sin, and then when sin is fully developed, it gives birth to death. And I saw that in him because this sin and temptation had fully overtaken him, and he felt no hope anymore because it had just taken over his life pretty much. So he decided to go to a conference for men who have some sort of sexual addiction. And at the conference, they encouraged all of the guys to give like a full disclosure to their partners. So he got a notebook and wrote down everything from his past and all the things, that he had kept hidden from me. And he sent it to me, and it was really hard to read because I found out that he had lied to me about several things. And one of the things was, previously he had told me it was something he'd struggled with for a few months. And I came to find out that it was something he had struggled with for 8 years. And that was hard to read because that just showed it was such a deeper rooted issue than what he had originally said. Having an addiction and a struggle for a few months is a lot different than years and years. And I just realized I couldn't trust him anymore. So I decided to end the relationship and go our separate ways because I knew I would live the rest of my life always wondering whether he was telling me the truth or not. And we both decided that, when we broke up, we wanted to share our story with people because it had affected him, obviously. He was the one who was dealing with that sin, and I saw it like totally overtake his life and affect him emotionally and spiritually and mentally. He was depressed and full of shame, and it just wasn't fulfilling. That's not how God intended for our sexuality to be used. He didn't intend for it to be used that way. And so it's not fulfilling or satisfying, and I totally could see that in his life. And then it affected me because I felt like I was doing something wrong, and I felt like I wasn't good enough because he was going and looking at other women. So it made me feel like he wasn't, attracted to me. So I just have such a burden for bringing awareness to this issue and helping other people realize how much it can affect your relationships. So I think it's so accepted in the world today and sometimes even encouraged. And I have just seen all of the negative effects of it, and I just really hope that people understand how damaging it can be to even a single person, even if you're not in a relationship. It can make you feel totally worthless and defeated because that's not how God intended us to live our lives. So my desire is just to bring awareness to this issue and better equip people to understand this issue and know all of the negative effects of pornography, and that it is extremely common. I think it's more common than we all realize, and it's something we need to be proactive about and not allowing any of that in our lives, and encouraging other people to say no to pornography and choose God's plan for our lives, because that is what is truly satisfying and fulfilling.